Tonight we are asking the biggest question of all. Are we heading towards nuclear war? Well, the short answer is not yet. But if one looks at that question from the point of view of the famous doomsday clock, then we're definitely a few seconds from midnight. We've never been closer to nuclear war than we currently are as you watch this program. The Cuban Missile Crisis, which as a child I still recall, chilled my blood. I went to bed thinking I might be in a nuclear war by the morning. And I was only 6 years old. But since then, and that was resolved, of course, by diplomacy between President John Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev, the then leader of the Soviet Union. Since then, there has been a mutually assured destruction balance in the world, and supporters of nuclear weapons have always argued that presence of nuclear balance kept the peace, by and large, in terms of large-scale wars until at least the end of the Soviet era. Then there was a brief unipolar period in the world where, although China and Russia possessed nuclear weapons, they were not possessed of the economic and political strength in themselves and in the world in order to be a credible user of them. And in that unipolar period, the United States ran riot, particularly in Iraq, but also elsewhere. Now that we have a China and Russia resurgent, in the first case economically, in the second case with a wholly modernized armed forces and particularly nuclear armed forces, we obviously have a genuine balance of terror. And therefore, when it began to be a real question as to whether NATO would apply a no-fly zone in Ukraine, the whole question of nuclear war suddenly loomed large on the political agenda. Of course, when they say no-fly zone, they mean plenty fly zone. They had a no-fly zone over Libya, but there was plenty of flying. It was NATO planes intervening in the civil conflict in Libya to what has turned out to be disastrous results. Results I predicted to them at the time. But a no-fly zone over Ukraine would, of course, be a wholly different matter, because it would mean that Russian airplanes would be shot down by either NATO pilots or NATO anti-air defensive batteries. And, of course, the hostilities between both sides would then become general. If they became general and one side or the other began to lose ground, if the Russian side began to advance into the Baltics towards Poland, or equally if the NATO side began to advance towards the Russian frontier, then battlefield nuclear weapons would, without question, be deployed. And if battlefield nuclear weapons were deployed, then it wouldn't be long before intermediate range, and then even, in the worst case scenario, intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads, which would of course bring about the end of the world. It sounds like apocalypse now. But when I see the recklessness of the Western politicians, but particularly the Western media, including media paid for by the Western governments, by subterfuge usually, I wonder just how close we got, how close we are.